So I wanted to talk about, ways that fasting can slow aging. And we wanted to talk about and cover some of these concepts or rules of how to do an effective fast. And at Dr. Q Longevity, our, procured program is the Dr. Q fast. And so that happens to be 5 days, and which kind of dovetails into this concept of not wanting to slow someone's metabolism down. All of us have been exposed to The Biggest Loser, and there was severe calorie restriction for a prolonged period of time, and there was also significant exercise done for a prolonged period of time. And when someone is doing a prolonged fast, like really beyond 7 days, 7 to 10 days, you could start to affect, we don't know about the exact cause of why this happens, but someone's metabolism can slow down, and likely has to do a lot from just like an evolutionary standpoint, the same way that we're not necessarily exploiting, but I guess, utilizing some of the effects of fasting and how our body responds to the calorie restricted state. The same thing, it takes place in regards to the calorie restricted state for a prolonged period of time could affect an area of our brain called the hypothalamus that is involved with our basal metabolic rate, our metabolism, and it could slow it down. And so then all of a sudden you have this concept of like the winter hypothesis. The winter hypothesis is that during the winter, there wasn't a lot of food. So our body became very efficient in storing the little food that it obtains. And we're no longer in that environment of scarcity. We're in an environment of dietary excess, and we have a lot of food at our fingertips that is available to us. And we end up slowing our metabolism down, resuming our regular dietary routine, and we could end up gaining more weight. And that effect could be very negative for us. Is there anything that you could think of that you could chime in about this prolonged fasting?
So it's almost like you're teaching the body over time. When you do prolonged diets, and you've heard the term, yo-yo dieting doesn't work, you always get back more and more and more. When you do prolonged diets, you're actually teaching the body how to deal with prolonged periods of calorie restriction. The same way as if you walk too far without any shoes on your feet, you're teaching the skin of the feet to become thicker to deal with the fact that you're irritating it. So the more that you do these prolonged periods of calorie restriction, like a 6-week diet, you're teaching your body to become more efficient at storing whatever calories you bring in. So although calorie restriction is something that we talk about, we're talking about calorie restriction from a standpoint of don't overeat, only eat what you need, but don't be too low for too long of a time. You try to no calorie coming in but just like anything else you do over time, become more like prolonged fasting. For most people, there are some people that it is beneficial for, but for most people, prolonged fasting will have a converse, a negative effect over time.
Right, and that yo-yo effect really seems to be so detrimental to our overall health that some of the research suggests that it would be better off not trying to have ever lost the weight. Like they would have been better off not doing the yo-yo dieting. Like it's just, the point is that yo-yo dieting is not a neutral thing that takes place. But of course, our health is like a journey.
Obesity is even a lower risk factor than yo-yo dieting. Like you're better off staying at a heavier weight than you are going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down, yes. Which is what prolonged calorie restriction does. It forces that up and down and up and down.
Right.
And that's more detrimental to the body.
Right.
I always heard that. It never made sense to me, but that's what the research shows.
Yeah. And so, in regards to like not slowing your metabolism down, like when you're so we talked about the idea of calorie restriction, and fasting, it's all a matter of like the intention and the balance behind it, right? Like calorie restriction done to an extreme, maybe is fasting for a few days, but eventually you aren't really in the fasting state anymore. You're more categorically in the starvation state, where you're having not necessarily a repair and regeneration take place. It's like the body's in a deficiency mode. The organ systems can't function. Your immune system can't function right. And so there can be this imbalance that takes place. And fasting could be done in all different ways. But when you do fast, you're not in a growth state, you're in or an anabolic state. You're in what they call like a catabolic state. You're breaking things down. But you could sometimes break down things that we want. We want to maintain our muscle. When we lose too much muscle, there's this fancy term called sarcopenia, which means loss of muscle, bulk, and we lose our function. And there's a correlation and association of maintaining our musculature and longevity and health span, and decreasing our frailty as we get older. So you don't want to break down muscle. So how do you do that best? And so if you're doing just a water fast for a prolonged period of time, you are going to be breaking down muscle as well as tapping into your body fat stores, that visceral belly abdominal fat. But what we provide with the Dr. Q fast is you're providing the calorie restriction, but you're providing some nourishment. And that nourishment is just enough so the body is able to turn on some of these healing pathways that get turned on when we fast and when we're calorie restricted, but it doesn't turn on the process for the body to say, break down muscle protein and muscle tissue to get the fuel.
Right.
So we're able, so then, yeah, Dave.
Jan asked a question. She was saying, there are folks who only eat 1,800 calories a day. How do you determine what's a good level of calorie consumption? She said she has a cousin who's in a program where maintenance for her is 1,400 calories a day. I don't know your cousin, so it's hard for me to say. Like, your cousin might be 3.5 feet tall and weigh 70 pounds, and that's a good caloric intake for her. Not that I'm saying that for somebody who weighs 70 pounds, but there was quite a bit of study that was done out of the University of Southern California, the Longevity Institute, where Walther was doing prolonged periods of calorie restriction, and 1,400 calorie a day for an adult, almost no matter what their size is going to be a low calorie diet or a calorie restricted diet. And those diets have a long-term history of causing more problems in the body, causing frailty, causing greater disease incidence,
Slowing the metabolism.
So I don't know what her need is, and I can't speak to her, but you can determine your caloric need. There's some apps, and if you're dealing with a dietitian or a doctor, they can help you figure out what your particular caloric need is. But I can tell you that for an adult, 1,400 is going to be a low calorie diet, or LCD. And even depending on her size and activity level, it might even be a VLCD, or a very low calorie diet.
Yeah, I think there are different formulas that you could utilize to try and figure out your average calorie intake that are readily accessible online, in a similar fashion that one could assess their cardiac risk quotient. But then there's even more advanced in the lab, where they're able to do different biometric testing, and based on see what your basal metabolic rate is. Basal metabolic rate is the energy that you use to maintain physiologic functioning of your body, and you're able to figure out what it is for you at your time in your life. And so some of these recommendations are very big picture, and so, so when you don't want, so when your calorie, like they did, there was the, where they did the biodome, where they were living in a biodome for like over a year. They were severely calorie restricted, and they had improvements in chronic disease risk factors of having good blood sugar, being low fat. But they were relatively young individuals, and one of them, Roy Walford, ended up suffering from a neurological disease. And it's a question of like, it's a matter of balance. Like you could have these in the same way you could exercise to an extreme and have a lot of wear and tear on your body. But then there's a sweet spot of exercising to the extent that it's promoting your health. You could consume too much water and it could cause electrolyte damage. You can get too much sun and it could cause damage. It's finding that sweet spot. And so on average, fasting anywhere from 3 to 5 days is 3 to 7 days. It's long enough to kind of turn on some of these pathways that are involved with repairing, restoring, regenerating, and promoting a healthy weight.
Right.
So don't break down muscle is, well, that's what one of the things that we incorporated with our fasting mimicry with the Dr. Q fast. The scientific research on fasting mimicking diets shows that you can mimic this metabolic fasting state and target the visceral belly abdominal fat and improve some of these chronic disease markers, but it doesn't seem to break down muscle, and that's huge. And so then,
and that's why it's kept to a shorter time period, because the longer you go, the greater the chance that you're going to start breaking down muscle. And even with a 5-day period, there might be some muscle breakdown, but it's significantly limited as compared to a much longer time of fasting.
right.
That's why, and like there seems to be a sweet spot right around that day 5 that helps to preserve lean body mass, yet gets rid of the visceral fat. Like we all want to be bigger here and smaller here, and 5 days is really where that sweet spot hits.
Yes. So,
and the exercising helps with that as well.
Right. It dovetails into the common question of like, should I exercise? So, for some people, like if they're doing a medically supervised, prolonged fast in a facility where they're being monitored and they're consuming just water, typically it's recommended to just do that in an environment of rest, because then you could start tapping into some of your muscle stores, and it could make just the fast that much harder. And some of the growth pathways that are stimulated with exercise could maybe counterbalance some of the effects of fasting.
Right.
So it's not black and white, but what we're doing is we're doing like a modified fast. We're doing fasting mimicry. And so for the individual, it depends always on the individual. If the individual is someone that has never fasted before, never really calorie restricted before, they don't know how their body is going to respond, it would probably make sense, and it's recommended to partake in the Dr. Q fast, where you experience how your body responds, because you could kind of burn yourself out and stress the system too much, and also compromise your safety. Am I frozen? Okay. So the type of exercise that can be beneficial would be where it's light exercise, light to moderate physical exertion, walking, jogging, yoga, weight resistant training. But to the other end of the extreme, this high intensity, explosive exercise not only can tap you out quite a bit, and then you don't have enough fuel to restore, it could compromise your fast in the sense that you might have a voracious appetite afterwards, and you'll feel depleted, but it could compromise your safety in the sense that your body all of a sudden needs a lot of glucose, and your metabolism might be such where it's not able to like shift gears so quickly into that fuel source, and theoretically you could faint, right? You could theoretically pass out. So should you exercise? You can. If you never exercise, day 1 of your Dr. Q fast isn't the time to start exploring a new exercise routine. But if you're otherwise healthy and partaking in an exercise routine, continue it. But it's not like on day 1 and day 2, you could probably hit it pretty intensely and pretty hard, because your body is still working on a lot of the stores that it had prior to starting the fast. But by day 3, 4, and 5, you shouldn't be, running hills and sprints and 1 rep maximum.
And a good idea with this too could also be, we do recommend wearing, some sort of monitoring device I wear a, something that monitors, Dr. Evan wears, something that monitors your heart rate, the Aura Ring. And it's a good idea to know what your resting heart rate is, know what your working out heart rate is, like when you're doing certain activities, and know what your body can tolerate. And when you are exercising, really look at your heart rate. You don't want your heart rate to be jumping up too much, because you can get very faint very quickly when you're doing an exercise. So take it light, take it easy. But exercise seems to be very, very helpful during the fast.
It could be a way to preserve lean body mass with some body weight training or with physical weights. And so then there's this idea of working with your circadian rhythm, the concept of chronobiology, meaning chrono meaning time, and biology is our physiological functioning. And it kind of ties in a little bit with the concept of intermittent fasting and timing of meals. A lot of people throw around the term, I'm doing a fast, or I'm fasting, but it can mean a lot of different things, and there's lots of different intermittent fasts out there. Oftentimes people are referring to time-restricted eating, and a popular one that seems to have some benefits is a 16-8 intermittent fast. The one that we recommend that kind of is very safe and could also yield results is like a 12-12 time-restricted eating pattern. And that kind of ties in with the best balance of evidence in regards to safety and what some of the other research studies show, because what ends up happening is sometimes with a 16-8, it could certainly be a tool depending on your individual needs and your lifestyle. And it could be something that could kind of help move things in the right direction. But one of the ways to perhaps optimize doing something like an intermittent fast, like 16-8, is the concept of like when you're breaking your fast, and to work with your chronobiology, your timing, and your natural hormone rhythms, and is eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. So the concept is that you don't want to necessarily be skipping out on breakfast. There's a lot of research studies that look at a correlation, not causation. So there might be other factors in their lifestyle that's resulting in this, but there's a correlation that shows that if people are skipping out on breakfast, when they look at these epidemiological studies, and lots of them, and they keep repeating themselves, when they skip out on breakfast, there's decreased lifespan and decreased health span. So they die prematurely, and they seem to have an increased incidence of cardiovascular disease and cancer. It doesn't mean that if you skip breakfast and do a 16-8 that you're going to, that's going to happen. It's just, we're looking at the best balance of evidence, and we're always kind of like doing a cost benefit analysis, and that is some helpful information. So one would recommend, if doing time restricted eating, that you're front loading your calories. You're eating more of your calories earlier on in the day than at night. And I want to also kind of tie in the concept of this natural rhythm. You take your cells and put them in a petri dish. They work with the rising of the sun and setting of the sun. Traditional Chinese medicine to Western medicine shows that we have this circadian rhythm, these over 800 genes within our liver that's involved with our metabolism and our metabolic health are affected by the rise of the sun and setting of the sun, and even the seasons. And so there's research studies that show that you give someone the same meal at night versus the same meal in the morning, then at night, it seems to not work with your natural rhythms. Your insulin isn't working as well. Some of the chronic disease markers don't do as well, where you have elevations in inflammatory markers, increased insulin resistance. But that being said, when people do an intermittent fast of 16-8 overall, it seems to just restrict the time that they're eating all the time, and they could be subsequently have less time to consume more calories, so they end up eating less calories overall, and it provides some structure, and they have improvements in some of these metabolic parameters. But you could do it even better by working with your body, working with your circadian rhythms, and front loading the calories earlier on in the day.
In general, with most people who eat, reducing the time period of eating is going to be beneficial. Most of us, start eating when we wake up, maybe some sugar in the coffee, a Danish, and then we're having a bedtime snack like right before bed. If you can reduce the eating, one thing that across the board is beneficial, don't eat 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. Like that's a solid one across the board. Because
Right.
most people are going to bed when the sun's already down. And when we talk about circadian rhythm, it's eat when the sun's up, stop eating when the sun goes down. And that's a solid rule of thumb to, if you're not so sure what your rhythm is, try that, see how that works.
Right.
And then modify from there. And everybody's a little bit different in what their needs might be. But I can tell you that at 11:30 at night, you don't need an Oreo.
Right.
There's
So,
something that
2 to 3 hours right before bed, but then also the recommendation is to be laying in bed for at least 8 hours. So then you get your 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So
Right.
that's 7 to 8 hours of sleep plus 2 to 3 hours is about like 10 to 11 hours, right? And the research that was done also is like wait an hour upon waking because your melatonin is high. And so then you have that blockage of insulin. So like it ends up being that the hours of how you cut the 24 hours in the day ends up being about a 12-hour time restricted feeding window where you wake up at 7 a.m. You don't eat 3 hours before bed, you go to bed at 10 o'clock. So you from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., for example, that's a 12-hour window.
Right.
About 7 a.m. the following morning is about 12 hours has gone by. So that's how you kind of fall into that.
And another good tool
Parameter.
is when you start avoiding food when you're hungry, it helps you to determine what type of hunger that is. Is it a true physiological hunger or is it an emotional hunger? And the more that you keep your body in that deprived state, and I'm using quotes here, deprived state, because you're depriving yourself of the immediate satisfaction and gratification of consuming something. And in that deprived state, you'll understand a little bit better, like, am I really feeling pangs of hunger or am I just craving something to chew on? And when you're looking at improving your body, a little bit of discomfort goes a really long way. If you're not exercising hard enough to become uncomfortable, you're probably not doing it to the best benefit possible. Same thing with your eating. If you're not doing it where there's a little bit of discomfort, you're probably not pushing yourself to some degree of a limit. And if you're a poor eater, you're going to have to experience some discomfort. There's no way around it.
Yeah, it makes me think of Jan's question. It's like, how do you know what a great level is for calorie intake? It's like, well, it's like, are you losing weight slowly? Like, first of all, like, are you overweight? It's like, okay, well, like when you start eating to satiety and you're eating natural whole plant foods that aren't processed that make you overeat, well, are you losing some weight? Do you have enough energy? Like, if you're just depriving yourself and all you're eating is just a carrot stick. Like, so it's not so much really counting calories or counting carbs, fat, and protein. It's what are you have to look at the numbers. Like, what is your weight? What is your waist circumference? And what are some of the chronic disease markers of where those are moving? And that's, what is your waist to height ratio? And based on that, you start to see, because your calorie requirements are going to fluctuate, throughout your lifespan. And so you can use some of these numbers, like some of these calculations as guides, or go to a health facility like associated with your hospital, and they could do some testing to see your basal metabolic rate. But essentially, it's the proof is in the pudding. You got to monitor yourself and see, like, all right, I just lost 20 pounds in a day, or in just a month. That's kind of extreme. And oftentimes that's where you then, if it's a lifestyle that you can't maintain, then you're going to, if it's a lifestyle you can't maintain, then you're going to revert to your old lifestyle, eating the same foods, and then you could become sick and unhealthy again. And that's the yo-yoing.
So I just want to bring up, yes, and that's good. Like, I'm just segueing onto something else because we just got another question that came in, or a statement I'm on a whole food plant-based diet, no oil, no fat, no sugar, no salt. And I find that if I eat fruit or starch, I gain weight, and eating 90% non-starchy vegetables is basically my diet. My BMI is 21. There's a lot to unpack with that. Like, we could talk a lot about that. I'm just going to jump right to the very end of that, where my BMI is 21. I personally, especially when I'm discussing weight and counseling, and patients, I don't use BMI as an accurate calculator of what your needs are. And the reason for that, I'm going to give you an example that I tell to most patients is, there are two people that have the exact same BMI. Arnold Schwarzenegger, 21 years old, Mr. Universe. You can picture him, big chest, skinny waist. And Donald Trump, 2019, when he was a president of the United States. They both had the exact same BMI because their height and weight were the same. But if you can visualize both individuals, there's a stark contrast between those body types. So BMI is really not a great calculator. Now, your body weight more so because you're feeling how your pants fit. So when you're talking about your weight and your height, I'm a much bigger fan of a waist to height ratio, waist to hip ratio that can be easily calculated at home. And in the kit that we have, the Dr. Q Fast kit, we use a tape measure for people that they get the kit so they can monitor what their waist to height or waist to hip ratio is. But you bring up a point here: no oil, no fat, no sugar, no salt. I hope you're eating some fat in the form of nuts or seeds. But each individual has a basic need for their body to maintain a high degree of health. And what you do that works for you, is evidently working for you, but it might not necessarily work the same for everybody else. Having a 90% non-starchy vegetable-based diet, sounds like it works, very well for you.
Yeah, and it sounds optimal in that regards. But let's say your BMI is starting to creep, if not yours, but just one's BMI is starting to creep up, or their waist to hip ratio is creeping up. Perhaps, it's not so much counting calories, but you probably know of the concept based on your text here, your message of calorie density. It's like, well, perhaps I need to back off of, some of the more calorie rich whole plant foods. Like for some individuals, it might be like dry starches, like the breads, even though it's 100% whole grain, or it seems like you eat really clean, but like, excess avocados, dried fruit, nuts, seeds. And someone is saying that, well, I'm, plant-based, and it's like, well, you're plant-based, but you're eating not a lot of calorie dilute vegetables, right? And that's why it becomes really based on the individual and figuring those things out. But 1,400 calories a day maintenance is certainly, severe calorie restriction.
Right. Especially if somebody's doing exercise. And, we do recommend a minimum of 150 minutes of exercise a week. And, even if I just typed in quick to a calorie calculator that I have here, a 5 foot tall female weighing 100 pounds from the Mayo Clinic, doing about 150 minutes of exercise per week. Their 52-year-old female, their calorie requirements are about 1,650. And that's a tiny person. I mean, 5 foot, 100 pounds is a real tiny person. And, even 1,650 is more than 20% lower than or about almost 20% lower than the 1,400. So
yeah, and you do it for 5 to 7 days. That's okay. You're doing it for months on end, and then you're like, all right, I'm done with this lifestyle, and and that's where people can run into problems. So how frequently should I do the Dr. Q fast? Right. So you've done it for over 3 years. So like you might be kind of like, you've set your metabolism for that amount, and it's a tightrope. And it sounds like you've been doing it for 3 years. So that's fantastic. It sounds like you're maintaining it. Okay. And I would hope you're enjoying it for it to be that sustainable. So how frequently do you do the Dr. Q fast? And it really depends on the individual. Like if you're eating a really clean whole plant food diet and you're at an optimal BMI level and you're feeling vibrant and healthy and have otherwise no health issues, doing it 1 or 2 times a year, or if you were so inclined to like, find like just the way exercise could be enjoyable, partaking in a modified fast, like seasonally with like the changes of the seasons. But what the research studies have done, have shown is that it could be safely done on a monthly basis, depending on the individual. And to do it in monthly to 3 cycles, 4 cycles over a 4-month time period or 3-month time period, spacing them out by at least 2 weeks, ideally 3 weeks, allowing the body a chance to refuel and to restore itself and to re-nourish itself, like, and lay down the new foundation that you've created from the fast. But so if someone is otherwise healthy and has no health issues, it's something that could be done 1 or 2 times a year. If someone has a metabolic issue, such as not having an optimal BMI, their BMI being indicative of being overweight, so their BMI is over 25, right? And or where they're overweight and obese is greater than 30.
Yeah.
Their cholesterol is high, their CRP is high. These chronic disease markers increase the risk of heart attack, strokes, dementia, diabetes. So if you have insulin resistance, you have suboptimal levels, that's where one might benefit from doing this on a monthly basis, along with all the other lifestyle pillars of adequate sleep and appropriate exercise and also quality nourishment during that period of time. Dave, why don't you say it more succinctly?
So yeah, so if you have a need to lose some weight, if you have a need to correct some body marker or some disease process or metabolic process in the body, you should continuously put a periodic fast, a Dr. Q fast, a fasting mimicry, or regular fast into your diet on a very regular basis. You have heart disease, you have a high blood pressure. There's nothing wrong with doing this periodically. Theoretically, we'd say, oh, you should be on a long-term diet, but we don't do that because it slows down the metabolism. The prolonged fasting slows down the metabolism. So these little spikes or these little blips of activity create a significant healing effect in the body in a short, sharp shot, and then you go back to your regular daily eating. Another really nice thing about the fast is that after you've done 5 days of severe calorie restriction during a fasting mimicry, everything tastes delicious. Like, oh my gosh, this is the best cucumber I've ever had in my life. So your taste buds reset, and between the fasting periods, you begin to change your diet a little bit. And each time that you do another fast, your diet changes. So after you've done 4 or 6 cycles of this, and your pre-diabetes goes away, and your metabolic disorder goes away, and your body fat ratio is more in line, you're now eating a diet that's part of your lifestyle that doesn't then require you to do this over and over and over. So
Right.
we use it as a crutch when you're injured, right? You have a metabolic disease process. And then we use it like flossing your teeth or visiting the dentist occasionally for a checkup when you're doing well. And so each individual is on its own. But if you have any health risk factors at all, overweight, metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetic, any blood values that are off of normal, the Dr. Q fast should be done once a month until you're back in healthy line.
Right. And so a nice thing about a feature of one of the things that is nice about this type of modified fasting and fasting mimicry is that some people don't want to do anything. And so this is a way to meet them where they're at. And so what the research has shown is that you just did this once a month for 3 consecutive months, or just did this once a month for 4 consecutive months. That's what the research studies have shown. And they didn't have a dietary intervention in between, yielded a beneficial effect on promoting a healthy body weight and improving and promoting healthier levels of some of these chronic disease markers.
It revealed a tremendously beneficial effect.
Yes, tremendous. So it's a way to kind of meet people where they're at and saying, hey, can you at least just do this? But it could also be a jumpstart and springboard into eating more in the pattern that Jan had, discussed in her text, eating a longevity type diet, eating whole
I
plant
don't
foods.
know if
Yeah. And so what do I eat after the fast? Which kind of ties into any questions about that so far? But because we just have 3 minutes left. Are there any questions that maybe we could answer? Because I know that we dumped a lot on you here. If you wanted to do
you
it
have one
verbally on audio or on a message here.
So what do I eat after the fast? Generally, we recommend the same foods you ate during the fast, just more of them, right?
More variety.
More variety. The foods that you're eating on the Dr. Q fast are typically non-starchy vegetables. And we have some supplemental, products in there as well. There's a bar and there's a fast fuel and some other things too, but they're non-starchy vegetables, some nuts, and then incorporating beans back into your diet, sweet potatoes into your diet, whole grains into your diet. And everybody's a little, I get pushed back. Oh, I'm gluten sensitive. I can't. Well, then your body. So you eat the things that you can't eat, but we work on reducing the intake of processed foods. We work on reducing the intake of animal products and work on making sure that the foods you're eating are low calorie dense, high nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, they're not low sugar, low sugar, low processed carbohydrates, low in refined grains, right? So the difference of the Dr. Q
I'm just going to
fast.
cut you off. I'm just going to cut you off here. I hate to do that, but we're running out of time. We got another question in.
Yeah, I was going to answer it.
Oh yeah. So
yeah, you want to answer it?
Yeah. What's the difference between the Dr. Q fast and Prolon? Conceptually, they're both very similar. They both assist you to make it through a 5-day fast mimicry period where you're eating a very defined diet and you don't have to worry about figuring that out yourself.
But
the stark difference is that the Dr. Q fast provides you with a whole food, plant-based diet where you're in charge of what you're eating, the foods you like, the foods you don't like. The Prolon is very highly processed. It's packets of soup. And some of the pushback we got on the Prolon was that they didn't like the taste. With the Dr. Q fast, you're choosing the foods you're eating, so you're in charge of how it tastes.
And we have a metabolic health tracker where you could measure these metabolic parameters with a blood stick. And you also have our support throughout the fast and in between on our platform.
Essentially, you get to eat foods